I am a proponent of short deadlines, high expectations. Probably better put the other way around, that I think that there's so much value in giving yourself extremely high expectations, and then in service of achieving or meeting those, you give yourself short deadlines. So short deadlines, high expectations. I wish that I could tell you who told me that in the first place, but it is a good one. So that's what I want to talk about today is the value of expectations, the value of deadlines. And deadlines is fascinating. I don't know that we always like them, but as it turns out, the most effective deadlines, are they self-imposed? Are they internal? Or are they external? How do we perform best? So I want to put that in your head. What do you think? Right off the top, do you think that you perform better by following and adhering and giving yourself your own deadlines? Or do you perform better when it's somebody else or something else that is giving you a deadline? It's interesting. And like always, it's really important to be honest with ourselves because the whole point of even considering this stuff is that we're interested in getting better. We're interested in improving on our performance. We're interested in getting what it is that we want, not doing any of this stuff just arbitrarily. And there's no doubt that somebody else giving us a deadline, it probably brings back lots of memories of being in school or having a test due and you didn't do anything at all and now you're having to cram, and maybe it was athletics, maybe it was who knows? Who knows? But deadlines are all around us. We all have and are expected to do certain things within a certain amount of time. So wouldn't it be better if I got really good at that? And so I became very comfortable, not simply operating under a deadline, but allowing a deadline to improve the way that I am performing whatever it is that I'm performing. So becoming more efficient, becoming more optimal. That's what I'm interested in. Looking at a deadline as a really positive thing versus a really negative thing. So, where did the term even come from in the first place? Well, it turns out it was a Civil War term, and it talked about a literal line drawn in the dirt, the sand, around prison camps. And if one of the prisoners inside the camp were to step over the line, they were going to get whacked. That was it for them. So there's a place called Anderson Prison, which was at Camp Sumter, and it was a Confederate prisoner of war camp in Georgia, and it was a mess. There were way too many people living in very unsanitary conditions with not enough supplies, and the combination of all that stuff is really bad conditions. And so, number one is who doesn't want to escape prisoner of war camp? But when you make it really terrible, which is probably most prisoner of war camps, everybody really wants to get out of there. So the guards, recognizing that these were tough conditions and everybody wanted to get out of there, they enforced a a physical barrier around, and it was about 15 to 20 feet inside of the camp's stockade walls. It was this invisible line that if somebody stepped over it, they were going to get shot by the guards who were stationed up on watchtowers. So it's a deadline. Step over that line, you're going to be dead. Not quite as serious today as it was back then, but certainly deadline today is a metaphorical thing. It became really popular in regard to the newspaper business and just the writing business. All right, you got to hit your deadline. We need your article, your submission by this time. If it's later than that, it's not making its way in. So kind of spread out from there. But it turns out, without actually calling it a deadline, human beings have been incorporating deadlines for a really, really, really long time, going back all the way to ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia when they were building these massive, obviously timeless, amazing structures, but also in ancient Rome and Greece. There were examples of it, and that would go from the military to the Olympics and even the medieval times, certainly the Industrial Revolution. There were all kinds of deadlines. So, coming back, short deadlines, high expectations. Since neither one of us is going to be, God willing, in a prisoner of war camp anytime soon, and we're not going to be building ancient pyramids yet. Here we are, trying to perform the best that we can in the time that we have available. And that's really what it's all about. The high expectations, short deadlines, high expectations is I am not interested in working at any one thing for 24 hours in a day. I've got a lot of different interests, a lot of things that need my attention, a lot of things I need to be touching on a daily basis. And what I am interested in doing is when I have allocated time to do set thing, I want to do it really well. And deadlines help us to structure our work so that I'm not trying to do an enormous amount of work in a really short amount of time. What I'm trying to do is do really high quality work consistently so that I'm not in a position where my back is against the wall or I'm behind the eight ball or whatever term that you're interested in using. I want to consistently deliver high quality work. So that's what I'm interested in. And certainly I learned that early on and without really understanding or appreciating exactly what was happening. And I know I've talked about this a good amount, but I think that a tennis match, I had a history of playing tennis as a young person and a little bit as an older person. But tennis has taught me so much. In essence, it's a series of deadlines. You think about what a tennis match is you need to win a certain number of points to win a game. You need to win a certain number of games to win the set, and then you need to win a certain number of sets to win the match. And so it's pretty simple when you break it down like that, but each point becomes a mini deadline. And you win enough of those, you win the game. And again, each game is a larger deadline. Then you take the set, and each match, or rather each set, becomes a milestone. With enough sets, you win the match. Now, how is that germane to just being more productive and getting more things done? Well, what we're doing is we are focusing on the immediate short-term needs because I can't win the match in one point. Win it one point at a time. But we also need to be cognizant of mid-range objectives as well. So I have to win each point. I know how many games I need to win, and then staying committed the whole time. So having the stamina, both physically and mentally, and understanding that I need to put all of this together. So if I absolutely burn myself out in the first game of the match, well, I'm going to have a really hard time performing at a high level when the match could be on the line or towards the end of it. So it's essential to balance our physical energy, our physical stamina, and the mental aspect of it, because certainly with anything that we're doing, especially as knowledge workers, it's all about what's in our heads. Because you're probably not digging holes. So how do we make sure that we stay focused now, keep an eye on the midterm, keep an eye on the long term? So I think that there's a lot of wisdom there. And it is a mistake to be thinking about, going back to the tennis thing, to be viewing the first point of the match as any more or less important than the last point in the match. Because obviously each point contributes equally to the final result. Whether you lost the first one and the last one, or you lost the first point but you won the last point, which meant that you won the match, odds are, in fact, that's exactly how it goes. It is a cognitive bias to view one point being more valuable than the next. And it's also a fallacy, or more of an illusion, this idea of this clutch moment. Again, those points later on, they feel really, really, really important, but it's the same. And if we get to the point where my heart rate is the same throughout the entire match, that's really what we're interested in doing. And when you look at top performers, that's how it goes. That's how it goes. You're going to have a level amount of focus and intensity so that we don't get to the end of the match and we need to pull some rabbit out of the hat. We're just operating cool, collectively, calmly, and consistently. I think that is what it is all about. So we need to paint and approach each point and every activity that we are doing like they really matter. So focus on the early ones as much as you need to be focusing on the later ones. In terms of if you are somebody that has production expectations, say that this year you need to do $100,000 of revenue if you're a salesperson. Okay. Well, we all know that if we've been in professional sales in January, you're not operating with quite the degree of intensity or whatever the term might be in January as you are in December. But wouldn't it be better if we just operated with the same level of intensity throughout the course of the year so that we're not slacking off in January, February, even for the first quarter, only to make it so that we do have to do heroic things, that we do have to do Hail Marys or home runs in the bottom of the ninth at the end of the game. I would prefer to not do that. I would prefer to be consistent. And revisiting this, Roger Federer was regarded as many to be the greatest tennis player ever. He did a commencement address recently, and he highlighted the fact that over the course of his career, which is one of the finest careers in sports, that he's won over 80% of his matches, but he only won 54% of the points. So what a perfect example of this is that winning and losing at that level and at the level that you are that we operated on as professionals comes down to it's just paper thin margins. So we have to approach every point as if it has the same value as every other point does, because it does. So the idea is training like a champion, living and operating like a champion means that you approach everything that you do with high expectations and that you set deadlines on all of it. So Federer doesn't wait for the biggest moments to bring out his best effort. They bring it every point. So if you and I can treat every small task, every meeting, every decision with that same level of focus, it all takes care of itself. I think the big wins take care of themselves. And to do it consistently, to prepare consistently, when you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. You find yourself in a better position to perform at a high level. And I think a wonderful example of this, going back to athletics, is that of a professional fighter. And there's some fighters who stay in pretty consistent shape all the time. But there's some fighters who will do their fight camp. Maybe it's a 3-month period of time where they come into their camp horribly overweight. And they've not been disciplined in their diet. They've not been disciplined in their workouts. They've not been disciplined in their training. And so they have to have the 3 months to go through and get back into shape and get their nutrition right so that they're in a position to get out there and perform. And I'm almost 1,000% positive that the top performers in every kind of fighting, every kind of professional fighting, they stay pretty regular. So, know that there's outliers, certainly, but I think that you understand what I'm trying to tell you, what we're trying to talk about. So, there's a couple of great quotes that are germane to that. And one of them is that we don't rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training. So we don't rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training. And it was a Greek philosopher named Archilochus who said that. I've also heard Jocko Willink say that. I think that this has been attributed to him as well, and he's a pretty good one. But we have these expectations that we're going to do and how we're going to do when the bright lights are on or when we're actually out there performing. But that's not where we're going to actually perform. It's not our expectations. It's the level of our training and our preparation. That's where we're actually going to perform. And with Jocko, if you're not familiar with him, he was a Navy SEALs commander. So he led Navy SEAL teams. And if there certainly isn't. There is not any group of human being that needs to stay ready than the Navy SEAL does, and to have consistent preparation so that when the time comes to actually perform, that you are ready to do it. So it's true for you and I as well, just at a different level, which is what this is all about. But it's not just true of athletes. It's not just true of warriors, war fighters, of soldiers. It's true for everything. There's a great quote from Jeff McNally, who is a cartoonist. And as a cartoonist, he is writing a new submission probably 5 days a week for many years in a row. And his quote is that the best thing for my creative process is a deadline. If you give yourself all day to do something, it's going to take you all day to do something. If you give yourself a shorter deadline and say, I have an hour to get this done, well, then odds are you're going to get it done. It is the perfect example of Parkinson's law. It says that work will expand or contract to fill the amount of time available for its completion. Nolan Bushnell, he was an electrical engineer. He founded Atari as well as some other different enterprises. He said the ultimate inspiration is the deadline. So there you go. So it's true for business. It's true for athletics. It's true for every domain of life. So how do you do it? It's great. Thanks, George. You told me how important deadlines are, but how do you actually do it? And the good news is there's been a lot of good research on this. Dan Ariely became really interested in this. He released a very robust study in 2002 on procrastination. And the experiment, which he conducted with another gentleman and MIT students, so these are some smart cookies, certainly. The students were given 3 assignments to complete over a semester, and they were broken into 3 different groups, each with a different deadline system. Some of them were allowed to do self-imposed deadlines, so they chose their own due dates for the 3 assignments, as long as they were there before the end of the semester. The second group, there were evenly spaced deadlines that were preset by the professor, and they were evenly spaced throughout the semester. And then there was also the deadline of that all the assignments were due at the end of the semester. So I sort of muddled through that last part. For one of the groups, you could do your own. For another group, you did not get to do your own. Then the third group, there was just a deadline at the end of the semester. The big takeaway was that the students with evenly spaced deadlines performed the best. They were the ones that procrastinated the least, and earned the highest grades. The students with one deadline at the end performed the worst. Many left all their work until the last minute, believe it or not. Sounds like me, leading to lower quality. And then the self-imposed deadline group performed better than the final group, but worse than the evenly spaced deadline group. So, takeaway, which you're obviously smart enough to figure out, is that self-imposed deadlines help, but they're not as effective as external deadlines. We human beings underestimate our ability to procrastinate. And so with that ability to procrastinate means that we do not always set optimal deadlines for ourselves. Okay, big takeaway. But the best kind of deadlines are the ones that are evenly spaced out. So breaking work into smaller scheduled chunks improves productivity and reduces our stress. One long deadline at the end of the year, it's going to encourage procrastination. We've all been there, probably back in school. So when we don't have a deadline, people are more likely to delay work until the last minute. So use external deadlines whenever possible. If you have work to be done and nobody else is imposing a deadline on you, create one by finding an accountability partner. And that's just somebody who you can say, hey, you know what? I've got this big project coming up. Do you mind if you become an accountability partner for me? And you can check in on me. And there's all these different apps as well. It's wise to break big projects into smaller projects or milestones with deadlines. So instead of saying, I'll finish this by next month, set smaller weekly deadlines. So if it is due next month, you can give yourself a deadline each Friday to have a piece of it done. But definitely don't just leave it open-ended and say, we got one big deadline 6 months from now. Or rather, I've got to do $100,000 of production by December 31st. And if you have no other deadlines, you're going to have a hard time achieving that. And if you do, it's because you had your hair on fire for the last probably 90 days of the year. So avoid that at all costs. Create intermediate deadlines to prevent last-minute panic. Periodization, the idea of working on a quarterly basis, is a great thing. I think that having monthly goals and then breaking it down into weekly activity standards. That is a recipe for success from my perspective. And it's even better when you can have somebody else holding you accountable to those deadlines along the way. So, making sure that we are giving ourselves proper expectations. And I say, give yourself really, really high expectations. We're not shooting for mediocrity here. We're not shooting for the middle. You want to give yourself high expectations and then break your work into smaller, manageable, digestible, actionable, completable, different milestones. So it's pretty easy to do, and then incorporate somebody's help to actually hold you accountable to it. And it could be that you already have that within your organization. It could be you have somebody, a manager or peers who are also working on specific things or similar things rather. And so forming accountability partnerships with them really positions you for more success than just going about this on your own. And just think back. Think back to the top performers. In every different arena, what they are doing is they are working consistently. They're giving themselves milestones and deadlines. So therefore, they're able to do really high quality work in the time that you have available to complete these things. It's a lot of it. So it comes down to recognizing the value of your time. It comes down to recognizing the value of your energy, recognizing the value of your attention. So these are three of your most valuable resources. So when you make the decision that this is what I'm expecting of myself, this is the work product that I am attempting to complete, and here's how long I have to do it, then you can reverse engineer it and say, okay, each week I need to be doing X, Y, and Z. And I'm going to hold myself accountable and ideally have somebody else hold me accountable to the things that I say that I'm going to be doing. And then you look at that. You can look at it for 52 weeks. Each week I'm going to perform that. You can break it down into a monthly basis. You can break it down quarterly. And then obviously that's all going to translate into a lot of success for you over the course of a year. So I think that that's the trick to all of this. Break it up into actionable steps so it's not overwhelming, because I don't know how to produce, $1 million in a day, but over the course of a year, you just break it down. You say, okay, this is digestible. This is how I'm going to make it happen. The whole idea here is, how do we do great work in the time that we have available, because we're all really busy. So as always, do your part by doing your best.